Hello everyone, good afternoon, welcome back to Window Watch. Connor Southwell and Paddy Davitt here today to reflect on all of Norwich City's transfer happenings inwards and outwards. I can see the comments already pouring through, which is good to see. And of course, you know the drill by now. Any questions or comments about anything Norwich City transfer related, get them in and we'll do our best to go through them. Pad, it's been a relatively quiet week, certainly in terms of transfers. I guess most of it has been dominated by contracts. Still plenty for us to chat through, and I'm sure still plenty of questions that will come our way. Let's start with the pre-season friendly that Norwich have in about an hour's time against Huddersfield. We will bring you the team news to that if and when it drops live, and of course we'll have a link on our sites for you guys to tune into the stream for those who wish to do so. But this represents a step up in opposition for Norwich City. I think you can clearly see now mapped out how pre-season steps up in the next few weeks.
Yeah, stepping stones clearly in terms of the level of opposition. It might not pan out that way, but we didn't see the game. There wasn't a stream available earlier in the week, but Lincoln certainly, reading Daniel's comments, gave them quite a tough test, and you'd imagine it'll be moved on from that with Huddersfield, albeit the last time these clubs met, it was a fairly emphatic one-sided 7-0 beating from Norwich, but I don't think we'll see 7-0 again. And worth pointing out the format as well, unless they've changed it in the last couple of days, 45 minutes. So downplays a little bit the competitive angle of it, or at least the result of it, because I'm sure there'll be a lot of chopping and changing. But it'll be interesting. We're assuming the team news will drop pretty soon, if not any minute now. But from when we spoke to Daniel yesterday down at Carrow Road, potential for maybe Gibson, Hanley, the GOAT, and even Tim Krul. So that'd be great to see them taking their first steps towards the Premier League build-up.
Yeah, it definitely will. Let's start. Well, I guess the only place to start really in terms of transfer news this week is with Todd Cantwell. Of course, some reports sort of earlier this week claiming that Aston Villa were in advanced talks for his signature, which certainly isn't the case from our perspective. But I thought I'd broaden this out more widely and speak about him more generally, because he's a player that since he burst onto the scene, obviously bar the loan spell, Norwich haven't had an inquiry for. An extremely talented player. We know his ability, but it does seem like potentially, certainly in terms of Villa and Cantwell, not the first time we've heard his name linked to that club. Norwich have already seen an attacking midfielder move to Villa this summer. I think there will be fans who saw these reports and were probably quite concerned about them, but it's probably exaggerated, I would say, in terms of Villa's interest. Is that kind of a fair reflection?
I think so, Connor. Yeah, I'd certainly forget. I mean, the question there, keep hearing Cantwell's closing in on a Villa switch. No, definitely not. 100% not. No advanced talks.
He'll probably play today, won't he, for instance?
He will. He was at the celebration dinner 2 days ago. Todd Cantwell is not imminent. Well, Todd plus cash with Dan Juma. Well, I don't know. That's a different debate. But Todd and Villa, no, there is no imminent. We're getting to the I's, T's. He's off to the Midlands with his representatives doing medicals. Absolutely not. Categorically not the case. We've spoken to the relevant people at the football club. Now, we said it earlier in the week, actually, given the back and forth that the two clubs would have had over Buendia, there are channels of communication there. And would there have been a conversation about Cantwell? Yes. Earlier in the summer, maybe. Is he a player with admirers inside Villa Park? Yes. But they're looking quite stocked with attacking midfielders at the minute. They've got a certain player by the name of Jack Grealish, who for this time, at the current time, is still an Aston Villa player. A lot of speculation about his future in Man City, but I think they might be more interested in getting Harry Kane done if you read the headlines in The Sun this morning. But so a lot, as always with these things, there's jigsaw pieces that get put together, but things need to happen in a chain sequence. You did a very good piece earlier in the week about the centre-back scenario and how, one thing can happen with one other club, and that's a trigger knock-on effect. And that may well play out as we move forward in the window. But right here, right now, Aston Villa, Todd Cantwell, no, absolutely not. And as far as Daniel Farke's concerned, he's planning for Todd. And I'm pretty sure when the team does drop, Todd Cantwell will be, unless he's had an injury in the last day or two, a genuine one, he will be part of the plans this afternoon and is very much part of the plans moving into the Premier League. Yes, there's the contractual situation in the background, but worth stressing again, that's 2 years left. There's an option that Norwich would take up, taking him in 2023. That certainly in this window is not a priority. It's not at the top of Stuart Webber's in tray. Bringing in extra players to supplement what they've already got is far more of a priority. So right here, right now, you're seeing Villa, you're seeing advanced talks. Forget it. No, it's not that is 100% inaccurate.
Yeah, there you go. That clears that up. And there's an interesting point sort of that underpins all of this. And you mentioned it there. And it kind of lends into what Stuart Webber was talking about yesterday, really, in terms of this chain reaction, how perhaps the market needs, you said Harry Kane, we could probably throw Jack Grealish into that equation as well. Maybe a big deal to get across the line for a few things to happen elsewhere. I mean, Webber said yesterday that he felt there's a lot of paranoia in the market, clubs maybe not wishing to kind of devalue their talent because of COVID, but naturally there will be a deflation probably as panic sets in towards the end of the window. Norwich, as we know, are being a lot more patient now in terms of the way that they operate. With Todd, you get the sense that there would be a situation should, I guess Jack Grealish is probably the relevant one. If he was to move, let's say, to Manchester City for a lot of money, as is being reported, there is a scenario where Villa perhaps would increase that interest in Todd, or is that kind of just, that's transfers, isn't it, I suppose, in terms of Club A gets impacted and that has a reaction to Club E, EFG, whatever. It's all a chain reaction, isn't it, I suppose?
Inevitably, yeah. We nearly had an interloper there. That was my 14-month-old son. What was that clip? The Sky News report,
you're thinking, aren't you?
Yeah, no. That was the famous one in the pandemic. Yeah. But I think there was a later one with one of the Sky reporters where she basically had to bribe him with, "Do you want a biscuit, Harry?" or whatever his name was. Thankfully, we didn't have that scenario. It's time for his nap, but he's not going willingly. But anyway, yeah, spot on. Yeah, because ultimately let's deal in hypotheticals. You know, if you're Aston Villa and at the minute you've got Buendia, you've got Cantwell, freudian slip. You've got Grealish. Why do you need Cantwell? That's what I'm saying. If Jack Grealish remains a Villa player and you're now dropping Emi Buendia into their midfield mix, and I can't even off the top of my head think what other midfield options they've got, but I'm sure they've got some decent attacking options.
Well, they've been linked with Leon Bailey as well, haven't they, this week?
Yeah, exactly. So right here, right now, is there a position for Todd Cantwell in that Villa mix? You'd have to say no. I mean, with the greatest respect to Todd Cantwell, you're not playing him ahead of Jack Grealish. So if there isn't an opening now, then it's not going to happen with Villa. But hypothetically, again, yeah, if Jack Grealish is no longer a Villa player in the weeks that pass between now and August 31st, and Villa need to replace, and they're looking around, they were obviously heavily linked and in fact made a couple of bids for Smith Rowe, who's now signed a new deal at Arsenal, then it's entirely plausible that on a watch list of young English attacking midfield types, why wouldn't Todd Cantwell be on there, given what he did 2 seasons ago, given, you know, the stride he made in the Championship last season, where he was far more of a frontline option for Norwich. So, yes, is Todd Cantwell a player Aston Villa would be looking at? Should Jack Grealish move on? Absolutely. Why wouldn't they be? So, but right here, right now, at the risk of repeating myself, no, that isn't a deal that is likely to happen anytime soon, put it that way. But as you said, Connor, worth monitoring what happens with a Villa, with other clubs who might be moving on, attacking players in the Premier League, because, you know, that's the whole point of this. You know, and we've spoken about this at length on here. There was never going to be a fixed position at July the 1st or whenever the window officially opened, the first week of July, or was it June? Actually, I'm losing track. Might have been June, where whatever the position was with Norwich in terms of ins and outs at that point was going to be what it looks like on August the 31st. That doesn't happen. That's fantasy football manager simulation type stuff. What you have here is a lot of moving parts. Reference it with the deal that's just gone through in the last few days. Norwich would have liked to bring Chris Iyer in from Celtic. Didn't happen. So now they move on, and possibly that might be moving on in a direction which is actually staying with the 4 that they've already got, plus Omar Daly in the mix. So, you know, ultimately these things are so fluid at this stage, particularly this stage of the window. And I thought that was really interesting from Stuart yesterday, that what we're not aware, because we're not party to the actual inner workings of what's happening inside these clubs in terms of transfer signings. But he was very obviously pointing out that there is a lot of uncertainty and jitteriness, almost paranoia. That's a fantastic word to describe it. That because of the pandemic and the ongoing financial issues, clubs are not having the financial wherewithal to do maybe the deals they want to do. Or if you're a club with assets, you're trying to hold out for your best price, when the reality is you might have to lower expectations, which I guess, again, as Stuart pointed out yesterday, means we're probably looking at now Norwich doing their business much later in the window than ideally they'd like to. Daniel Farke would want all his players in as soon as, so he can work on what he needs to work on in pre-season, building into Liverpool and beyond. That's not going to happen, I don't think. I think it's going to be, as Stuart flippantly said yesterday, deadline day this time round is going to be it's going to be like a feeding frenzy, panic, he said. Whether that includes Norwich, I wouldn't have thought so, not on a Webber watch. But I think generally it's going to have to be a game of patience, and Norwich fans, as well as Stuart Webber, are going to have to probably accept the 5 potentially new deals that they want to do in terms of positions in the squad. Not all of those are going to be in place by Liverpool. In fact, they're definitely not going to be, because that's essentially what Stuart's trying to allude to yesterday, that a lot of clubs are going to wait and wait and wait, whether you're a potential buyer or a potential seller, and then it's just going to go mental in the last 2 weeks or so of the window.
Yeah, worth noting as well that Stuart Webber has a good relationship with. It's not his Villa counterpart, isn't he? Because they have a sporting director, but Christian Purslow. I think they work together at Liverpool. So I think it's fair to say that probably helped the Buendia deal, and would probably help in any situation where perhaps Aston Villa's interest in Todd Cantwell did increase, which would probably only be due to. There we go. Well, there's the team news. Would be due to a Jack Grealish exit. Then that situation. I was coming on to that, but there we go. There's the team for Norwich City's friendly against Huddersfield this afternoon. Tim Krul returns. Barley Mumba, Christoph Zimmermann, Omabamidele and Poeta, the back 4. Rupp and Leymelu, the midfield 2. Rashica and Cantwell on either flank, with Dow behind Timu Pukki. So good to see the GOAT return up front.
Also, Aston Villa's imminent signing, Todd Cantwell, also in the 11.
That is, so there you go. The bench, Michael McGovern, Max Aarons, Jordan Hugill, Onel Hernandez returns to the bench, Adam Ida, Rob Nizzet, Dan Adshead, Tomkinson, Georgie and Dixon Peters. So the three young lads remaining on the bench. That looks a lot stronger, doesn't it, as a Norwich City 11, perhaps minus the left-back area. We obviously know Yanulis is making good progress than they have had. Max Aarons on the bench, which lends us nicely, I guess, to speak about him and his situation, because there's been a lot of chatter kind of this week about maybe how quiet it's been and maybe how people haven't necessarily expected that. I think the expectation was, when kind of Stuart Webber mapped out that Norwich City probably would be in a position where one of those would need to depart, that possibly that would be Max Aarons, given the fact that he was the player that generated offers from Barcelona, Roma in January, 2 significant football clubs in European football. Yet this summer, minus sort of the whisperers with Everton, which seem to have now kind of concluded. Now Rafa Benitez has been appointed as manager. Where do you think he kind of sits? Where do you think his situation is at the moment? Do you think there is interest from elsewhere? I mean, Stuart Webber described Norwich as being very confident that both him and Cantwell would be Norwich City players when the window closed. Are you surprised maybe by the lack of noise around Max Aarons this window?
Well, again, I mean, with what we probably could detect from the outside, but certainly with those paranoia comments from Stuart yesterday, what maybe was the fear at the start of the window isn't necessarily. And I think there is a growing confidence now inside Carrow Road that Max will still be here beyond the window, which would be fantastic news. I certainly didn't think that would be the case, but Everton, you mentioned there, Connor, Ancelotti was very keen on him. That deal probably would have gone through if Ancelotti didn't depart for Real Madrid. Benitez, by all accounts, isn't. What's a different type of profile in terms of his fullbacks. So that rules Everton out of the race, we'll say. You look at Tottenham now, I look at it from a distance, and Nuno's gone in there, and of course, who's already there? Matt Doherty, who he sold from Wolves.
Long-term admirers, Spurs as well, aren't they?
Exactly.
I think that's no secret now.
No, absolutely not. But what I'm saying is, if now the head coach has gone in there, is reunited with a player who he relied on heavily at Wolves, and you've also got Aurier still in the mix there. Do Tottenham now, under this regime, i.e. Nuno at the helm, particularly looking to do a Max Aarons deal, and the answer is probably no. So that maybe sees Tottenham taking a step back. Now, of course, you've got Arsenal linked as well. I don't think there's anything beyond speculation in that. And a lot of that could be dependent on what happens with Bellerin if he moves on. We keep going back again to the moving parts, the jigsaw puzzle, the chain reaction. So, Atletico, you could even say, look at them. Basically, Max was getting linked if they sell Kieran Trippier, who was heavily touted with Manchester United. But as it stands right here, right now, Kieran Trippier remains an Atletico player. So if that wasn't to happen and he's remaining in Madrid, then Atletico don't need Max Aarons. So you start to see now that what the fear might have been at the start of the summer in terms of interested parties isn't necessarily the case. And ultimately, I think it's no secret that any club wanting to take Max Aarons will have to pay more than Norwich received for Emi Buendia. And if the money isn't there in the market, Norwich aren't going to be compromising. So, if there's not an opportunity for the lad, then the lad stays here. And I think, listening to Stuart yesterday, I think increasingly, if you're a Norwich fan, you can be in growing optimism that Max Aarons will be still here beyond August 31st, which would be fantastic, because Norwich are better off in the Premier League quest with Max playing at right back.
You kind of mapped out the clubs there. Everton, as you explained, we think have now fallen away. We don't think that interest is perhaps what it would have been if Carlo Ancelotti was still in charge. Of course, he's now gone to manage Real Madrid. Doesn't seem like he's going to be taking Max with him to Real, although, of course, Barca were interested in last summer. So I guess we can never say never. But in all seriousness, it now looks like sort of the interested parties, and again, you kind of mapped it out quite nicely there in terms of there's still chain reactions. I mean, we had the fresh reports, didn't we, about Atletico Madrid earlier this week, I think, in terms of Max, and Tottenham as well, as we've said, are long-term admirers of even before Jose Mourinho was in charge. So not a massive shock, but it seems like those two clubs are the two that, if any, probably have the firmest interest in Max. But as we've explained, probably a lot of chain reactions that would need to go on there for that to happen. In terms of him and Cantwell, just to close off this discussion, what do you think it would take in terms of price for a club to come in and prize them away from Norwich City at this stage of the window? And then as a secondary question to that, would that be something that would increase the later on in the window we get to? Because I think people will listen to Stuart's comments yesterday in terms of the frenzy and perhaps how that might impact Norwich City. Do you feel that what Norwich City are asking for now would change sort of a week or so to go left in the window?
Well, in that scenario, it would change, and it would change in an upward direction. Yeah. There'd be no paranoia infecting Stuart Webber in terms of the valuations he places on those two players. No, I'm 100% confident that neither of those players would leave for a fee less than what they receive for Emi Buendia, which, let's just say if that package maxed out, that would be north of 35 million that Villa would have to pay for Emi Buendia with all the attendant clauses. So if there's no club coming to Norwich with a serious bid in the region of 35 plus, then no, Norwich will not be lowering it, because that completely flies in the face of what Stuart has always said, which is tied to the contractual element. And of course, that's why I'm maybe loath to put Todd in the same bracket, because his contract status is slightly different. That might be a different scenario, but certainly with Max, I think off the top of my head, is he 2024? I think he is. So, there's still plenty in terms of Norwich's favour with his contractual status that wouldn't mean they'd have to cash in. Absolutely not. So, as I say, at this stage, unless something happens and hypothetically Arsenal need a right back, or Trippier goes and Athletic go follow up, which we believe has been an approach, not in terms of that what you asking for will take him, but certainly hypothetically, if they needed a right back, I think there would be a phone call. I'm pretty sure of that from what we led to believe by reports in Spain. So, but no, right here, right now, I think if I'm a Norwich fan, I'm increasingly confident Max Aarons is still here.
There you go. Again, we mapped out the situation. Kieran Trippier, of course, I think they've got 3 right backs, Atletico Madrid, so would need quite a bit of movement. And obviously, as everyone is acutely aware at the moment, money in Spain is hard to come by, as Barcelona are finding at the moment. Let's take a few questions, and then we'll go on to some sort of incoming conversations. Jake Tidy, straight in. Like this, Jake, from you. Any news on a potential incoming? Straight in, no mucking about. It's been a quiet week, hasn't it, Pad? I think that's fair to say, but it's clear that Norwich City would like a significant, well, I say a significant number, certainly a few more incomings. I think the positions now are well documented, aren't they? But fair to say Norwich City aren't done at this age. But in terms of imminent arrivals, and of course, with the caveat that everything moves very quickly, it doesn't seem like there's anything in terms of next 28, 48 hours, does it?
No, I'd agree with that timescale, Connor. No, I think we touched on this earlier in the week. It has been a busy week in terms of contract renewals, games. They've done the Liam Gibbs thing eventually today. They pressed the button on that. All that was just being held up by the clubs being able to agree a fee. But lots of little bits and pieces. So there has been plenty of activity going on, I'm sure. But in terms of potential incoming senior to add to the 6th already brought in, if you include Gilmore, not in the next 24, 48 hours. No, we're not getting any smoke signals to say things are moving to that stage. But again, if Stuart is basically telling us for using media channels to tell fans prepare for the long game, then that would suggest that things aren't going to be happening imminently. But by the same token, the volume of business they want to do from here, which if they get everything done, then there'd be probably another 4 or 5 additions. You'd like to think 2 or 3 of those can be in the building before Liverpool, because if not, then that period from August the 14th to August the 31st is just going to be absolutely frenzied. And I don't think really Norwich need that amount of what people going on off the pitch. Go back to last summer, Championship season starts, and then Daniel's constantly, until that window closed, having to field questions as it was then when they Cantwell, Aaron's less so. But we had the Bournemouth game where they had to got left out, and he was talking about their lack of focus. Norwich can ill afford to have that type of scenario playing out with any of their players for I think there's 3 games between the start of the season and the window closing. But even 3 games, well, they're going to be tough on off those 3 games, given who they're playing, to not have all that going on in the background, and Daniel constantly having to field questions about player ins or player outs. So, yeah, nothing imminent in the next 24, 48 out, but hopefully between now and Liverpool, another 2 or 3 in. You'd like to think so.
Absolutely. Andrew Howell has asked, afternoon, do you think there's anything in the talk around Ryan Christie out of contract in December, but Celtic proved difficult to deal with in the IR negotiations, possible addition in January? He was linked with Southampton, I think, last time I saw, but I would imagine his agent is probably doing a few hard yards given he's out of contract in December.
Yeah, I think we might have checked with 1 or 2 at the club when that link first got put out there, and they said there was nothing in that. What position is he again? Is he a wide player?
Attacking midfielder, isn't he? Yeah. Yeah.
No, I don't think that, given the sort of positions we know they're looking for, that doesn't really sort of tick the box, I don't think, no.
This is a nice one. Hey, gents. Hope all well from Melbourne. Thank you for watching, John. Appreciate you tuning in. Liam Winnell, I believe this was another one. The list is so long now, all the names merge into one. But Boubacar Kiate, the centre from Metz, I think Norwich got linked with him relatively early on in the window, and I don't think there was anything in it at that point. But I'm reciting off the top of my head, so I may be wrong. But he's certainly not in the centre back options that we were aware of anyway. So that's another name to cross off your long list. Tom Calton has said, hi guys, can you see any foreign loans with a possible option to buy coming in, a bit like Fulham, but not the same amount they did? What do you make of that, Paddy, in terms of the loan dynamic? They've obviously got one Premier League slot to play with. I think it's probably fair to say that Ollie Skip Avenue is firmly closed. We saw him involved in pre-season action against Colchester earlier this week. Lovely 50-yard raking pass that he made, put it straight onto the chest of Stephen Bergwijn. I think it seems like, from reports that have come out from the Spurs end, that Nuno was appointed with kind of the I don't know how not a clause or anything like that, but certainly with the view to embedding Ollie Skip and Sessegnon as well into the first team. A lot of bright talent they've got at Spurs. It seems to be that he's going to have to work with what he's got in the main. Ollie Skip seems a massive part of that. Do you see, in terms of Norwich City and their loan spots, they've obviously got one available Premier League loan, as we mapped out before. That can't come from the same club as what their first one is. So essentially they can't get another player on loan from Chelsea. Broadening Tom's question out then in terms of foreign loans, how do you see them using their remaining loan slots, if at all? It's obviously something that they maximised last time they were in the Premier League, and I think it's fair to say didn't have a lot of success with.
Just clarify for me, Conor, with the foreign loans, is there a limit of how many they can do? I think it's
4 in total. So it's essentially 2 foreign, 2 Premier League.
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, and the second part of that question was with a view to buy. Yeah. I mean, that's, that's how Gibson arrived. That's how Yanulis arrived. So I think that's a very astute question. I'm pretty sure that's an avenue they will be looking at, overseas market loan with a view, because you're sort of you're shelving the financial commitment potentially if it's maybe attendant on staying up in 12 months' time. Obviously, you need to source a player who the selling club are looking to move on, and that was the beauty of the Yanulis deal, that worked for all parties really. But given how persistent Norwich are in terms of their recruitment. Stuart again said yesterday, they're well insulated because they don't just focus or put all their recruitment eggs in one basket. They will, and he actually took that up as a strength of Norwich's vis-a-vis many of their other rivals, maybe for the same type of players, that they will go into every and any market that they feel there's a player there that is potentially untapped potential. It's certainly in terms of the fees that makes sense. And if you actually take a step back and look at the spread of markets they've brought players in under Stuart Webber and Farker, it's everything from South America to deepest Poland, isn't it, for Płacheta I think given the finances they've got to play with, to do 5 deals, they're going to have to be very creative, I think, and I'm pretty sure that is an avenue, foreign loans with a view to, that they will be definitely looking into if they can bring in players who they feel, always worth reiterating, improve what they've got, which I think is important, particularly with the centre-back debate. There's a lot of centre-backs possibly they could go out and bring in, but are they actually better than Gibson and Hanley and Zimmerman to a lesser extent? And would they, if it's a young player, potentially using up one of those loans? Yeah. Does that make sense when you've got Omabama Daly there, who's clearly a part of the Premier League plans in terms of the squad? That makes no sense. So, it's a difficult one to use that loan wisely, that domestic loan. But yeah, I could. That's definitely a scenario I could see playing out now for a lot of reasons. Looking at maybe exploring the foreign loan options with possibly a view to a buy.
That was kind of my follow-up in terms of that second Premier League loan. Now that the door does seem closed on Ollie Skipp, and certainly from what we've heard, it does seem to be probably extremely unlikely. We can probably say no in terms of him coming back to Norwich City this season, probably that clear, unless something drastic changes between now and August the 31st. How do you see them now, if at all, using that second Premier League loan? Because as you mentioned there, getting a young player, certainly in terms of if we're talking about centre-backs, probably doesn't achieve what they want to achieve if you're just going to bring in a loan to end up to be fourth choice. And this is kind of what my piece was about the other day, in terms of it's suddenly become a very complex pursuit for a centre-back. So, 2 questions, I guess, really. How do they use the second Premier League loan? And if it is a defender, how do they get that sort of profile and balance right? And I guess you've kind of touched upon it there in terms of what you said.
It's a difficult balancing act. I mean, if you look at the other loan that they've used up, they've brought in Billy Gilmore, and the way that deal seems to have been put together, I think it's there's an expectation that if he plays a sufficient amount of games, then maybe the actual fee and the financials around that drop, because obviously if you're Chelsea, you're getting what you want, which is that guy getting exposure, consistent exposure at Premier League level, so that he comes back much closer to Chelsea's 11. And if that is the case, is there a similar type of deal to be done with we're not breaching any confidences that say that Pep Guardiola is a big fan of Daniel Farke's and vice versa. So, okay, they can't go back to Chelsea and explore the Tuchel-Farke relationship now, but is there I'm sure Man City have got a vast array of talent who aren't going to be threatening the 11 or even the 18, but who certainly could come in and do a job. And if there was a mutual sort of arrangement that could be put in place in terms of game time and the finances around a deal of that nature, you'd have to say, ultimately, what's the mantra that's driving all of this? Quality and not quantity. Well, yeah, you bring in a player from Man City, even if it's a Man City backup option, you'd have to say that's going to be as good, if not better, than the existing central defenders, if we're talking about that position, but that equally applies to any other part of the pitch. So I think that loan, if they're going to go Premier League route with it, I think it's going to be one of the top tier clubs. I don't see, if you're a club who could potentially be rivaling Norwich, you're not going to lend a player who you feel could benefit your cause. So that's a non-starter. I don't see any mid-ranking Premier League clubs, unless there's been some sort of fallout with a player, which is, of course, maybe what paved the way for Gibson coming to Norwich. That doesn't strike me as an avenue that there's going to be too many options who could come in. So I think it's all pointing to a Liverpool, a Man City, a top elite level club who have the squads, need to get players just below their first team out and playing games and getting games at a good level, which, of course, Premier League, Norwich can offer that. So right here, right now, yes, Ollie Skip won't be that one, but could we see another Ollie Skip type capture from an Ollie Skip type club, i.e., a club with aspirations to be in the top 6? Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Agreed. I think as you mentioned there, if they were to use that, and let's say they were to use it on a central midfielder, as we've kind of mapped out there, would need to be one from the top clubs and one who probably isn't 18, 19. They probably need to be a bit further along, wouldn't they? Probably 22, probably between 22 and 24, and also have a body of games. I've seen a few people in our comments mention Twanzebe, who's at Manchester United, but I think he's played something like, I'm completely off the top of my head, so it may be slightly more, but around about 30, 35 games in terms of league football, which Norwich would probably want a bit more experience from that, wouldn't they, in terms of an option if they were to bring one in on loan in terms of games, but we shall see. This is an interesting question from Joe Keeler on YouTube. He said, do you think there's a certain emphasis on signing a defensive midfielder before the season starts? As I still think we're a little light in that position. Obviously, the midfielder they've been linked with heavily is Philip Billing. We've mentioned patience around top targets. This certainly seems to be one that Norwich are prepared to be patient on. Do you see in terms of that midfield area it being, well, I suppose how many do you see? Farker obviously said they've lost 4 and recruited 2. So how do you kind of see the maths in terms of that position and how many they recruit in central midfield areas?
I think we only see another one, really. They want to do a centre back, full-back, left full-back. There's probably an area now they're looking at. Daniel, threw that one in after the Kings Lynn game. And the striker is a well-worn target area they're looking at, and possibly another wide player. So, yeah, I think however you slice it up in terms of midfield, one more, and I think if they could get Billing, he would be the one more. So it is an interesting question because he is, I guess, earlier in his career, he's a DM, but in recent times he was used as more of an attacking option. And if you look at Norwich in the 10 role, Kieran Dowell started pre-season well, but they look a little bit light there. So again, that flows into how Daniel's going to set his teams up. You got McLean in the mix there. Rupp is still a viable option for him, and obviously Lees Malou now coming in. That's another player who can play in that area of the pitch. But that out and out Ollie Skip type, who almost just patrols in front of the back four, Alex Tete in his heyday, I don't think they're looking to source another one of those. So it's going to be interesting how they cover that off. Because Gilmore isn't that type of player, as we know. So, maybe just hints a little bit more at this kind of reinvention and tactical tweaking and setups that Daniel keeps talking about. And of course, we've seen first 2 preseason games, he started with a back 3. It looks like that today a little bit, does it? I think, no, actually, it looks more like a 4 today.
I think it's a 4 today,
yeah. With Hetter and Mumba on the other side. So, that is really intriguing how they're going to go about it in the middle of the park, because I think with a fair wind, if they can get Billing, that'll be them done midfield-wise. So it's going to have to come, the solutions, from within the current group, I think.
Do you think anything's really shifted in terms of Billing? I mean, we kind of said last week in terms of the 2 clubs maybe being slightly apart in how they value him. Do you see that having shifted at all in the week? It's obviously been very quiet, hasn't it? So it doesn't seem to be the case.
No. And did you spot it was Bournemouth out or have been out in Spain, and he was playing out there, wasn't he? He was playing games. So, again, that's just that element there tells you there's nothing imminent, if he's still part of Bournemouth's pre-season planning. I'm sure Parker's gone in there, and the first thing he'd want to do, as any new coach would want to do, is look at their existing players before deciding what they want to do. But there's no doubt, I think financially Bournemouth would need to move 1 or 2 on this summer. Dan Juma is for my mind the star asset, and he's getting linked with Villarreal. But again, depending on whether a valuation can be agreed, whether that deal happens, and back to moving parts and domino effects. If they can't move on a Dan Juma or they can't move on a Solanke, for example, then if Norwich are willing to put down X for Billing, then as we get towards the window and then the financial pressure begins to ratchet up, and of course Parker will want to do his own business and bring in his own players, and if they have to generate money to enable him to do that, then at some point push comes to shove. But I think when Webber talks about patience and digging in and not going away from their top targets, maybe 2 seasons ago, he talked about that yesterday. He felt when they didn't get the top targets, they went down to their lowest targets a bit too quick. He actually referenced Patrick Roberts in that. He says he's not going to make that mistake again this time around, and I think you can put Billing's name on that that Billing is one of their top targets, and they're prepared to wait because they feel potentially there could be some wriggle room from the Bournemouth end. So if they get Billing, that'll be it, I think, midfield wise.
Yeah, in terms of Bournemouth, it does look like free assets, doesn't it, when you look at their squad in terms of certainly names that have been rumoured in terms of Danjuma, Solanke, and obviously Norwich is interested in Billing, which is obviously fairly public now. So if it is a trade-off and you get towards the back end of the window and we speak about this paranoia that Webber kind of alluded to, and they've still got Danjuma and they've still got Solanke and teams aren't meeting their asking prices for those, and then they've got an offer from Norwich on the table that is maybe doable and helps them out financially, then that becomes a lot more attractive, doesn't it? So that explains maybe why Norwich are willing to be a little bit more patient on that one. Ollie Baines, photography, will be with you for about 10 more minutes, by the way. Of course, there is a game at 1:30, so we'll have to escape fairly quickly. He has said, is Brais Mendes from Celta Vigo still on the radar? I think he's another one that got linked, Spanish winger. What do you make in terms of that one, Pad? Obviously, Norwich, ideally, as you kind of mapped out there, would like a wide player. Spain is a market that they do a lot of work in. It's obviously where Emi Buendia came from. Is that one that you could see?
Not heard anything that would say it was a substantive link on that one, but yeah, I like him. I mean, he was kind of in and around the Spanish squad there. I think more so maybe because there was a few concerns about they might lose players from the first choice to coronavirus going into that tournament, and I think he was in a training group or two, so he's obviously clearly highly thought of. I'd have to go back and check what his contractual status is, what we're talking valuation wise. I mean, again, if it's ticking up beyond kind of 10 plus million, I think that would probably rule Norwich out, but he's definitely one, as you rightly say, Connor. Spain is a market that they've been known to go and source from. So I'd imagine he'd be one who would be on a long list if he ticks that wide box. Although, again, a little bit like Rashica, I get the sense that if they could find a wide player who could also operate down the middle, and that might tick a couple of boxes. And if you've only got a finite amount of money to have that versatility, we've seen Lees Malou flagged as versatile. Rashica clearly is a versatile operator as well. And I'm not sure Mendes would give you the central attacking option as well. So a link you could understand, but not one I think that has any sort of legs to at this stage.
There we go. We'll just rattle through a few more because, as I say, a bit pressed for time in terms of how we usually are. We've touched upon Liam Gibbs, I think, in previous episodes as well. We'll probably do a bit more of a detailed video with one of our Suffolk colleagues on him maybe next week. So we'll park him for the moment, but that's all done and dusted. Becomes the latest sort of under-23 recruit, doesn't he? And another attacking midfielder, which is very interesting in terms of their pursuit. Ghassan Ahadmi, of course, has joined Portsmouth on loan for the season, which is a tremendous loan move for him. He was out in Spain last year playing for Real Oviedo's B team, but got a nasty foot infection by the sounds of it, which reduced his game time. He has been on trial with Portsmouth. We've been trying to desperately find out his contractual situation with probably very limited joy. I think that's fair to say, but he is still a Norwich City player. He's gone there on loan, and Danny Cowley seems to be a big fan, scored a lot of goals in pre-season. And then the two I will come through. Let's start first and foremost with Josh Sargent, Pad. This is the 21-year-old Werder Bremen striker that Norwich City were linked with last Sunday, I believe. Reports of a £10 million or €10 million bid. Sorry, I got there eventually. Had been knocked back for him. Talk to us about Josh Sargent. He is a player that can play as a striker and has played as a wide player as well. American international, Bundesliga experience. He would tick a lot of boxes in terms of both profile and both in terms of what we know Norwich City are looking for this window. All
day long, Connor. Yeah, he's definitely one they have looked at. And of course, you know, they've got the link to Werder as well with Rashica, haven't they? So yeah, but ultimately the part of your sort of statement there that would put it down a cul-de-sac is the 10 million valuation. If Werder are absolutely nailed on, that's what it's going to cost. They've just gone down, haven't they? But of course, they've gone down and now they've banked initial 8 million for Rashica, so that probably lessens the need for them to have a fire sale without knowing the ins and outs of the financial situation there. But if they're steadfast that it's going to take that, and I think there's one or two other clubs have been linked to him as well. So if it's not Norwich are the only show in town, then I think that's ran its course because Norwich aren't going to be paying 10 million for him. If getting billing done is in the similar sort of ballpark, I don't see they've got that amount of money left to make two huge marquee level signings. So unless 10 million is not the actual figure that the clubs could do a deal at, and there's a bit of kite flying going on in the media over there, then I think it was in the US media, wasn't it? CBS, wasn't it, who reported that? So no, at this stage, for those figures, that's not going to happen.
And then the other one, which came out last night from the Telegraph, I believe, Tom Tribal and Fulham, a loan move. He's obviously someone that's not in the first team picture. He's with this sort of group of players that are currently being put through their paces by Andy Hughes, which is, I would imagine, relatively traumatic. So he may be fairly keen to have a loan move as well. Andy Hughes, a very good coach, of course, I jest. But in terms of that does seem, both in terms of fit and club, the fact he was out on loan last season, that seems to make a lot of sense, doesn't it, for all parties?
Yeah. That'd be a fantastic move for Tom Tribal, because you'd imagine Fulham under new management, they've got a very wealthy owner there. They really will not be wanting to sit around in the Championship for any longer than they have to. So, whether that was the original report a loan with a view to, was it? So
just a loan, just a straight loan,
But he's only got 12 months left, hasn't he? I think that's his Norwich status. So that'd be a very similar Dermot type deal. You'd effectively be waving goodbye to Tom Tribal, but presumably in terms of the finances around that, Fulham would cover, if not all of his, then most of his salary. So, and he's not going to get a look in here. So I think that deal comes off. It's brilliant certainly for Tribal, certainly for Norwich, and Fulham clearly feel he's a player who can add something. And why wouldn't you? Because in the right mid, we talked a lot here about mixes in the midfield. We all whoever's seen him in a green and yellow shirt, if you've got the right players around him in the centre of the park, then he can be a very good option at that level. But if he's exposed a little bit defensively, then he doesn't look up to the job. So he had a few back issues, I think, at Blackburn that curtailed his loan there. But if that is substantial interest from Fulham, then Norwich wouldn't stand in his way, I'm sure, and that would be a fantastic move.
Yeah, potentially a Tom Tribal, Harrison Reed midfield too. That'd be all right, wouldn't it, for the Championship, as Norwich fans will know. Again, apologies for kind of rattling through these, but as I said, we're limited for time somewhat. So two more then, Pad. Let's start with this one. We've spoken a lot about centre-back. Apparently, according to Yellow's NCFC on YouTube, there's been a twist in the pursuit of a centre-back, and they're now going for someone, but no name mentioned yet. Do we know anything about this? I think we've kind of mapped out the centre-back situation, and it seems like, well, as we kind of said last week and spoke about in great depth last week, it doesn't seem to have evolved too much. And it does seem like now, if there was to be an addition there, it would have to be a loan from a Premier League club. I think that's probably fair to say.
I think just to repeat what we've said now in the last couple of broadcasts, that if you're ranking what Norwich want to do now in terms of positions of the squad and the monetary values that they want to attach to getting these targets in, I think centre mid and maybe even the top areas of the pitch now would be more of a priority than the central defence. I think, I'm pretty right in saying I didn't see Hanley or Gibson's name on the team sheet today. So it's obviously come a little bit too soon from today. But Daniel said yesterday they're both back in doing lots of the training sessions. So certainly by next week, the Coventry, the Sheffield United games, those two should be back in harness. You've got Zimmerman, you've got Omabama Daly. It's just not the priority it probably was at the start of the summer, when they clearly felt that they needed a Christoph Ayer type character in the building. So if that is the case, it's entirely feasible that the loan that we talked about earlier in the show will be probably used on a centre-back,
Absolutely. And in terms of previous targets, Sebastian Bornau has now signed for Wolfsburg, and it seems sort of the trail in terms of Tosin Adarabioyo has gone relatively cold as well. I think there was a release clause, but I have reported somewhere off the top of my head, can't remember where, that has expired now. So again, maybe that has kind of closed Norwich's interest as well.
So finally, then Pad, do a swap deal with Tom Tribal, mate.
There you go. Yeah, like for like. So
very close.
Just finally then, Pad, in terms of the pre-season friendly today, no Angus and no Jacob Sorensen. I'm sure we'll sort of be trying to chase Farker post-match for that. Obviously, we're covering the game remotely. Premier League training grounds are still very COVID secure with all the bubbles and stuff, as you can imagine. So it makes it slightly difficult for us to cover as opposed to at a stadium. But we'll be trying to get answers, I think it's fair to say, in terms of why those two aren't involved at the moment. I guess it's probably slight fitness concerns, isn't it? As we know, pre-season. Billy Gilmore, slight quad issue. They're not going to take a risk on him, and it's fair to say any player with a knock won't be risked in the current situation, but we'll of course get definitive answers, I think, when the game concludes, unless you've got any intel that maybe why they've missed out.
Not at this stage, no. But I mean, when we spoke to Daniel, that was yesterday around about 1 o'clock, and he was going back to Cairney, wasn't he? They were training yesterday afternoon. They were training this morning. These games are almost just at this stage another training session for him, and as a result, the workload on those players physically is quite intense, quite demanding, and I would assume that both of those are probably in a similar sort of Gilmore, Yanulis kind of bracket. Maybe have just felt something, a bit of tightness, and why take a risk? Excellent stuff. Top stuff. Sorry, apologies. It's a little bit of a shorter episode for you this week, but you can all now get across and watch the free 45 minutes against Huddersfield Town, as certainly we intend to do. Of course, pinkin.com, the place to go for all the coverage and analysis of that. It's going to be fascinating next week or so as Norwich step up pre-season. 2 games next week, which hopefully we will be attending, Coventry and in Chesterfield. You're missing that, Pad, which I guess is probably a little bit of a sour note for you, right? Not seeing your boyhood club in action. Well, I'm hoping, without wanting to jinx it, Connor, there'll be a live feed, and if so, my wife and child might have to do without me for a part of our holiday that afternoon. They don't know it yet, but that's just between us. Yeah, maybe keep that to yourself. I can't see that going down too well, particularly. And then, of course, Sheffield United next weekend as well. So that's going to be really interesting. Thank you all very much for watching. Thank you for all your questions. We'll be back again probably next Friday, I would imagine, at usual time, 1 o'clock, hopefully, given there's no game. Thank you all very much for tuning in, and we'll see you again very, very soon.